As journalists, when you confront a new event, you're encouraged to follow the framework. Who, what, where, when, and why. Who? Violent Antifa and anarchists. What? Rampaging through Portland, breaking windows, spray painting, causing reportedly tens of thousands of dollars of criminal destruction, extensively damaging both taxpayer and privately funded property. Where? Predominantly downtown. When? Last night, starting at about 8 p.m. and lasting for at least several hours. Why? This is the hardest of all questions to answer. On a night when most people were spending time with loved ones, in company of the people they care about, looking for hope and optimism that can come with the dawn of a new year, why would a group of largely white, young, and some middle-aged men, from all reports, destroy the livelihood of other people who are struggling to get by? It's hard for most of us to even comprehend what goes on in the heads of people who think it's okay or a good idea to go on a violent rampage through the city on New Year's Eve and during a pandemic. It's the height of selfishness. People who know me know that I'm a caring person, I'm an honest person, and it's been hard for me and for others to accept the reality that there are just some people on this planet who are bent on criminal destruction, that there are some people who truly just want to watch the world burn. That's what we're up against here. This isn't just about downtown. Employers, I've personally visited small businesses on Outer Foster, Gateway, Old Town, Chinatown, Lentz, and other parts of the city, and the story has been much the same. I want you to know that despite everything that I've seen over the last year, I still believe in redemption. These young-ish men can find a better path. I believe that they can lend their hands to working with rather than against our community. But redemption is not easily earned. It comes through accountability and taking responsibility for your actions. That's the spirit in which I've called us all together today. We need more accountability, and we need to hold people responsible for their criminal conduct. We're in contact with District Attorney Mike Schmidt, and we're working on these cases together. His office is actively pursuing prosecutions, and he's committed to ensuring people are held accountable for their criminal conduct. There are three things that I'm committing to today on this first day of 2021. First, I'm calling on our federal, our state, our county, and our local law enforcement partners to convene with me to develop clear plans to address anarchist violence, both here in the city of Portland and throughout the state. This should happen as soon as possible, even as soon as next week. My office will work on the logistics of that convening. Second, I'm also calling on the state legislature to increase penalties for people who repeatedly engage in criminal destruction and vandalism to ensure that they can be held accountable for the cumulative impact of their illegal actions. We need to look at reforms that improve our ability to video record and otherwise gather intelligence on these small groups of organized criminals. Third, in addition to stronger penalties and new law enforcement tools, I believe people convicted of criminal destruction should be required to meet with the employees and owners of the businesses that they damage. These people need to hear and to understand the social and human consequences of their irresponsible actions. All of them should be required to engage in public service, like litter pickup and graffiti abatement. My good faith efforts at de-escalation have been met with ongoing violence and even scorn from radical Antifa and anarchists. In response, it will be necessary to use additional tools and to push the limits of the tools we already have to bring the criminal destruction and violence to an end. Lawlessness and anarchy come at great expense and with great risk to the future of our community. It's time to push back harder against those who are set on destroying our community and to take more risks in fighting lawlessness. In closing, once again, I condemn anyone who engages in violence or criminal destruction, no matter what their ideology. To the businesses that have been damaged, to the employers who've been irreparably set back, to the employees of those businesses who find that they're going to be struggling even harder in the weeks ahead as a result of the illegal actions of a few, I want you to know you have my full sympathy. I know the impact on you. The impact on your employees is significant and it's lasting. My colleagues on the City Council and I will do what we can to support you and to find and hold accountable those people who are responsible. I want to thank Commissioner Mingus Mapps for being here today. His leadership and his partnership is important, as is the leadership and partnership of all members of the Portland City Council. And I want to express to Commissioner Mapps that I regret that on this, his very first day in office, he is here having to confront this issue. But I'm also equally grateful for his presence. I'd like to now turn it over to Commissioner Mingus Mapps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the press, for attending today. And I'd like to thank all the city staff that I see assembled here in City Hall on this, the first day of the year and a holiday for many, except for many of our public servants who work on days like this. I'd like to begin today by wishing everyone a happy new year. This is both the first day of a brand new year, and as the mayor mentioned, this is also my first day on Portland City Council, and I am honored and feel compelled to, as my first act as a member of City Council, is to ask Portlanders to join me in making today about a new beginning in Portland politics. With the new year, let's embrace the politics of peace. Let me tell you a little bit about why the politics of peace is so important to me. In about 2 weeks, Portlanders will come together to celebrate the 92nd birthday of Martin Luther King. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll come back together as a city to celebrate Black History Month. And I'll tell you, I'm enough of a political historian to know that I would not be here today if it weren't for the sacrifices made by Dr. King, and if it weren't for the sacrifices and progress made by the civil rights movement. The fact that I today am only the third Black male to ever serve on Portland City Council is both a sign of how much progress we've made and how much work is left to be done. And let's talk a little bit about the work that is left to be done. Here we are in Portland, 92 years after Martin Luther King was born, And even here in one of the most progressive cities in America, we still struggle to fulfill the promise of the civil rights movement. And even today, here in Portland, 92 years after Martin Luther King was born, his message of nonviolence is more important than ever. Now, we're all gathered here today because over the past year, Portland has been transformed by violence. In the past year, the number of homicides in Portland has doubled. In the past year, we have seen our police department use violence against Portlanders who are just trying to express their free speech rights. And in the last year, it has become a regular occurrence for bands of vandals to sweep through our neighborhoods, to smash windows and attempt to set buildings on fire. And you know, it happened again last night. Now, let me be clear. To the peaceful protesters out there, thank you. I literally would not be out here today at this podium if it weren't for the fact that you guys are out there and your ancestors were out there too, fighting for the rights of people who look like me. On the other hand, to the people who commit acts of vandalism or violence, I have this to say: please stop. Your acts of violence just fuel more violence. Violence is a disease, more contagious than any virus, and the course of that disease is inevitable. Violence inevitably leads to destruction, it leads to despair, and too often it leads to death. But there is good news. We already have a vaccine for violence. And of course, that vaccine already courses through your heart. That vaccine is love. So Portland, please join me in rejecting violence and embracing love. Please join me in embracing a new politics, the politics of peace. Now, I'm not naive. I'm not saying that we are going to agree on every issue, because we will not. I'm not saying that the challenges we face are easy to overcome, because they are not. What I am saying is this: please join me and my colleagues on City Council, and let's build a table together. And then let's gather at this table with open hearts and open minds. Let's talk across this table and work together to figure out how we can end racism in this city and how we can build a more just community. Now, in conclusion, I want to say today marks both the beginning of a new year and a new chapter in Portland history. There is more good news, my friends. We are the ones who get to write this chapter. So please join me in making this new year a story about a new chapter in Portland's history. And let's make this story about recovery. Let's make this story about reinvention. Let's make this story about rejoicing. And let's make this story about peace. So I want to thank the mayor and everyone else for allowing me to share my thoughts on this first day of the year. I now have the great honor to introduce Multnomah County Sheriff Reese. Please come.
Mr. Mapps, thank you very much. I want to say first and foremost that the violence last night was criminal and reprehensible. It was a focused attack on the Justice Center, a public safety facility that houses the men and women that protect and serve this community, as well as adults in custody that we have a legal and moral responsibility to protect. I arrived at the Justice Center last night at approximately 10:30 p.m. and upon arrival saw a large fire at 2nd and Main, store windows that had been broken out, and debris filling the street in front of Central Precinct, where it was apparent that the building itself had come under attack. Staff inside briefed me and told me that there had been an attempt to breach the Justice Center and that individuals had tried to force their way into the building and were unable to do so. Commercial rockets were being fired at the building, and a Molotov cocktail had been thrown as well. The Hatfield Courthouse soon thereafter came under attack, and there was an attempt to breach the fence, which drew the federal police services out, and they came under attack. As they tried to push the crowd away from the fence, they were attacked with commercial rockets, fireworks, and bottles filled with paint and rocks the size of baseballs. As soon as we were able, Portland police officers and deputies responded to assist them and protect them. We too came under attack. And it was absolutely criminal in nature what was occurring in the streets. And even though a riot had been declared and people had been ordered to disperse, it didn't appear that anyone heeded that direction. And we had to try and de-escalate and move back, but we came under attack as we did so. And so we responded and pushed the crowd and dispersed them to 4th Avenue, giving us enough time to pull back and disengage from the crowd. Again, it was reprehensible violence that occurred last night, and we're going to do everything we can to hold the people responsible, to hold the people that did that violence responsible. We had officers and deputies that were injured in the attacks, and again, I am grateful that their injuries were not more severe and that we were able to eventually protect the Justice Center from further attacks. And now it's my honor to welcome Chuck Lovell, our Chief of Police, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Last night was extremely challenging for our officers. A group of officers came under attack. It was very violent and a very large confrontational group. Met them with Molotov cocktails, rocks, bricks, frozen water bottles. As the sheriff mentioned, law enforcement officers were injured. We're thankful that no Portland police officers were injured, but to those who were, we wish them a speedy recovery. We should be clear about what this was last night. It was about violence and criminal destruction, period. It was a busy New Year's Eve night for the Portland Police Bureau. We began our shift last night in the evening shift, 18 officers under our minimums. We were able to muster between 30 and 40 officers to respond to this riot downtown during the course of the event. The sheriff did a good job of depicting what was taking place downtown to the building and to officers. And I want to let everyone know the Portland Police Bureau is doing everything we can to do follow-up. We had officers out last night documenting damage, trying to contact business owners and businesses. That work continues this morning and into today, and we're going to do everything in our power to find those responsible and hold them accountable. We're working closely with the DA's office and our partners. We're thankful for the Federal Protective Service and MCSO for their assistance last night. And that's all I have for right now, but please know the Portland Police Bureau is going to do everything we can on our end to hold people who are engaging in this repeated, violent, senseless destruction accountable.
All right, thank you, Chief Lovell. I'll ask the reporters to please raise your hands now in the panel here on the computer screen, and I can call on you and let us know who your question is for and what your question is. Okay, we have one hand up right now. Let's let Pri, can you identify yourself and your organization, please? PRI.
Yeah, hi, I'm an independent journalist. My question is for Mayor Wheeler. I understand that you are in charge of the police department, and I wanted to see if you would comment on the fact that the police officers, in the midst of a respiratory pandemic, we're using tear gas, we're using impact munitions. I know you talked about violence, and I just wanted to see what your comment was on the use of, these tear gas, impact munitions, and rubber bullets on protesters yesterday, and press as well.
Thank you, Pri, for the question. The objective when you have a large group of individuals who are marauding through our city engaged in acts of violence and criminal destruction is to de-escalate and diffuse, and where appropriate and safely able to do so, make arrests of people who are engaged in that criminal destruction and hold them accountable. And I will defer to law enforcement in terms of the actual deployment and use and tactics behind those tools. But when I heard about what was taking place last night, I gave a clear direction to use whatever means were necessary to quickly and safely de-escalate the situation and hold those who are engaged in criminal misconduct accountable.
Okay, next, Mike Benner, your hand is raised, KGW. You're next.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. This is Mike Benner from KGW. This question is directed at the mayor and maybe even Chief Lovell. You know, it appears that we had seen a break kind of in the nightly demonstrations, and then obviously we've seen action the last 2 nights. Are you guys fearful that things are going to ramp up again like we saw for however many consecutive nights, you know, over the course of the summer?
Yeah, that is a concern for us. We're monitoring closely when we can get information about events that are taking place that might lead to violence and destruction downtown. Sometimes we do know about these events slightly in advance, sometimes we do not. But it's definitely a concern, something that we're looking at closely on an ongoing basis. We have some dedicated resources to address those should they arise, but you know, it really, for us, is incumbent on us to work closely with our partners. Multnomah County Sheriff's Office has been a great partner for us, and we'll continue to do that work. We're no stranger to it. We've been doing it throughout the summer. So we'll continue, and for us, it's really just making sure we can marshal the resources necessary to deal with what we come in contact with.
You have a follow-up, Mike?
Yeah, I was just curious, Chief, you mentioned resources. How are you concerned at all with your resource level, staffing, things of that nature?
Yeah, staffing is a concern for us. I mean, we're looking at, you know, a year where we had, you know, some of the highest numbers of shootings and homicides in the history that I can remember as a Portland police officer. And I think we have probably the lowest number of officers that I can remember during my career as well. So staffing is a constant issue. We're still really thankful for our partnership that we had, you know, throughout the summer with OSP and MCSO. Our federal partners were there last night, and I think for us it's really a constant. We need to make sure that we are, you know, staffed appropriately, that we're resourcing appropriately. We've recently announced a shift to some of our traffic, K9, and narcotics officers back to our patrol functions, not only so we can answer 911 calls for service in a more timely manner, but also so we could save money on overtime and the spending that we're incurring there to try to get our shifts filled. So staffing's always a concern, and especially in a time of you know, COVID and the pandemic and strains on city budgets. I mean, it's a concern, I think, all around.
Okay, next, Hillary Borid from the Oregonian. Who's your question for?
My question is both for the mayor and Mr. Lovell. To the mayor, you had mentioned that you would like the legislature to pass some laws that would increase the penalties for people who repeatedly vandalize property. Could you be and then also to allow the city to do more surveillance of people who are committing these acts? Can you be more specific about the surveillance needs that you're not able to accomplish right now? And then secondly, for Chief Lovell, how many arrests have been made at this point related to the violence last night?
So part of the reason that I would like to convene federal, state, county, and local law enforcement is to talk about some of the specific strategies that we need to be engaged in around intelligence gathering. Often what we're running into is by the time a small group of individuals has gathered and have begun their criminal destruction spree, by the time the police are actually deployed and able to respond, those who are engaged in those activities are already gone. meaning it's an after-the-fact investigative follow-up. I believe that there may be some strategies that we can engage in that are constitutional, that would enable us to get off the back foot and be more proactive in terms of being able to respond to some of these situations more quickly.
And I am aware of 3 arrests that were made last night with charges ranging from burglary to theft and riot. And I'll take this opportunity also just to ask the public if there's anyone who has any information about what took place last night. If you're a business that was targeted or vandalized and that you haven't been contacted by Portland Police, please reach out to us and let us know.
Okay, next question, Allison Mechanic from K2. What is your question and who's it for?
Hi there. My question is for the mayor. It's regarding last night. It sounds like things were this sounds like this response is a bit more intense than previous responses, and I was just wondering, what's the difference between last night and then some of the other riots that we saw earlier on in 2020?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to characterize what was different. Obviously, one thing that was different was it happened on a night that's historically a celebratory night for people locally as well as nationally. It was a night when we didn't have the full deployment of resources available to us, so it was very important that we be able to rely on our partnerships. For example, our partnership with the Multnomah County Sheriff and his folks. In the absence of that, it would have been very difficult for the police to be able to contain this situation individually, but I will defer to the sheriff and to the chief of police if they want to characterize how this may have been different. From my perspective, it's cumulative. From my perspective, was more of the same types of activities we've seen. And if we want to change the dynamic here, and I'm hearing loudly and clearly from my constituents in this community, they want us to change the dynamic, then we need to be more proactive in terms of holding people accountable for these actions and being able to respond more quickly and effectively.
Thank you for the question. Again, last night's activity, I want to be really clear, wasn't about a free speech event or a demonstration. It was about criminal activity. It was focused on the Justice Center. It was focused on drawing police officers out, deputy sheriffs, and attacking them, and then attacking businesses. There wasn't anything about this that was protected or lawful, and it was reprehensible violence. We support the right of people to protest and demonstrate in our community and to do that peacefully. And last night was not that. Thank you.
Okay, Pri, one more question for you. Looks like you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I have, let's see, one more. Okay, so I guess my question is for Mayor Wheeler again. I think a lot of the protesters want, are protesting to defund the police, and I think one of the things that they wanted in 2020 was defunding it by at least, the police bureau by $50 million. And I was wondering if you would entertain that, and what your thoughts are, and directing that money to other services. So I was wondering what your thoughts and if you had a comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pri. Thank you for the question. So what I'm hearing from the BLM movement, what I'm hearing from the tens of thousands of people who gathered peacefully over the course of the last many months since the murder of George Floyd, is they want improvements in policing. They're not saying they don't want police or they don't want a public safety function. What they're saying is they want policing to be different and to acknowledge the historical racism that's built into the institution of policing. They want us to acknowledge this national reckoning around racial justice and equity and calls for common sense police reform. But personally, and this is just my opinion, that is not necessarily the same thing as wholesale reductions in budgets. I do agree with those who say we should be investing more upstream, invest more in education, invest more in family stability, invest more in housing, invest more in job training, invest more in economic opportunity and shared prosperity. I agree with all of those things, and my history in politics demonstrates that I understand and agree with those things. But when I hear my police chief and I hear my county sheriff and I hear others in law enforcement saying that they're being asked to do too much right now today, and they don't have adequate resources to respond to basic public safety threats, the right answer for me isn't necessarily to jump to cutting their budget further. Now, we all know, and the chief is certainly aware of this, that the city's budget is going to be pretty grim in this next fiscal year. And so the Police Bureau is going to have to find ways to reduce its budget regardless. It's our largest general fund bureau, so there will be reductions, but I don't want it to be haphazard. I want it to be based on fact. I want it to be based on information. I want it to be based on a thoughtful dialogue about how, if we need to reduce the budget further, and I'm afraid we do, just based on the economic reality, that we do it in a way that does not eviscerate public safety. Public safety is one of the most important things that government provides to people in a community. So from my perspective, the reason why I voted against the proposal of two of my colleagues in the last budget to reduce the police bureau by a further $18 million was I thought it was haphazard. If we want to talk about a thoughtful long-term strategy, I'm open to it. I've always been open to it. But for me, police bureau reductions do not necessarily equal an improvement in public safety.
Okay, one more question, and that goes to Steve from the PT News Network.
Hi, my name is Steve with PT News. I have a million questions, but I'll keep it to one. It's for the chief. Earlier on in this conversation, you spoke about accountability and the consequences of actions for these groups of Antifa that are out here causing the destruction to your community and the residents there. With my show, I've actually spent a lot of time talking to residents, excuse me, and police officers within your community. And I wanted to ask a question about accountable. You're accountable for the police force, whether good or bad, the actions as the commissioner of the police force, and the consequences of actions. One of the solutions or one of the proposals that you had is you wanted to sit down these Antifa people with the business owners that they've harmed and the residents that they harmed. So I just have one question for you. When is the last time you sat down and listened to the police officers in your community to find out how your inaction has harmed them?
This is Chief Lovell. You know, I talk to the officers in my department on a regular daily basis. We have open communication. We talk on a regular basis about our challenges, about things we can do better. And I'm always open to talking to whoever, community members, people that are police detractors, defund, whomever. I think it's important to take in information and talk with people who have different opinions than you. So I talk to a lot of people on a very regular basis, and I take in opinions and try to make the best decisions I can make based on what I hear.
All right, thank you for that, Chief Lovell, and thank you everybody for joining us today. If you have any other further questions, you can reach out to me in the mayor's office. You know how to reach me, most of you. Again, thanks for joining us. Have a happy new year and be safe.